Hey everybody, so I talked last semester about a new experiment I was trying in my introductory course with a new standards-based grading format using video assessments. I've now done that for 2 semesters. I'm wrapping up the second semester and I want to share some thoughts about the experience, maybe talk about what I would do differently and, pass on what I have learned to the broader physics education world. First, let me review the format. So rather than grading assignments, the tactic I adopted in line with the standards-based grading philosophy is that students' grades are determined based on learning outcomes. So not individual assignments, you got a 90 on this quiz and a 75 on this test and a 105 on this homework assignment, because how do you make those percentages align or be at all comparable between different types of assignments? Instead, you take the assignments and you assess to what degree the students have met the learning outcomes that they could have met on that assignment. So for example, suppose you give students a projectile motion problem. One of the outcomes might be I can retrieve the primary equations that govern projectile motion. And then another one might be I can rearrange those equations to solve for an unknown quantity, and then I can plug in numbers to that solution to obtain a numerical value for the unknown quantity. And then I can make sure that that unknown quantity has appropriate units, and I can check for reasonability of the answer. And so those are 5 outcomes. Ideally, a student would do all of them, but maybe they do all but that last one, and they've got 4 out of those 5 outcomes. And so the challenge in the course design process is to come up with these nice granular outcomes that you can basically apply a yes or no to, that they're easy enough and they're such a small unit that it's easy to say yes or no, the student did or did not do this thing. I adopted a 3-point scale where I said, yes, you did this thing perfectly, or no, you did not do this at all. Or the middle point was, okay, you at least acknowledged that this was a thing you needed to do, you tried it, you just tripped up somewhere, we would like to see you do better at this. Right? And that's how I worked partial credit in the course, was that they at least attempted that. And I feel like the goal of that, at least, is to make it so that there's a lot less subjectivity to the grading, right? That's what rubrics do in general, is that there's less haggling between you and the student over whether they accomplished the goal that they set out to do. The way I had my students meeting these objectives was through video assessments. This is something I picked up from Rhett Allain. Basically, you give the students a set of problems, right? There's usually one problem for video assessment, and then they record their solution to the video assessment. Now, some students will solve the problem live on video. Most of them, however, will work out the solution ahead of time and then walk you through their solution in the video. The second one I think is generally preferred because it cuts out a lot of the ums and the false starts, etc. And it basically gives the students an opportunity to present the work they have done. And what I found was that very often students would catch their own mistakes while recording the video. That's not something they do in a written homework assignment. And it's advantageous because you can tell from the tone of the student's voice and the wording that they use and how they talk about it, whether they actually understand what they're doing. And so it helps to separate any minor mathematical notational issues they might have in the writing that didn't really interfere with getting the right answer versus whether they understood what they're doing. And then the other component of this implementation is that the graders and I would go online and we would check off the outcomes that the students had met in these video assessments, and then we would, put a 0 on the ones they had not met. And that was their feedback to go back, redo the video, and resubmit it. And the resubmission process is key in this structure, because the resubmission is where the student says, oh, that's what that instruction meant, or oh, that's what we mean when we have this physics principle or this rule or this type of process, etc. It's where it finally clicks, and then they make the resubmission. So first, let me talk about what I liked about this process, and then let me talk about other things. So what I liked about this process, for me, mechanically, this made grading just a part of the week. There wasn't really a big rush or push to get things graded by a certain time, except around the midterm marker. We had to submit midterm grades. The graders and I made a really big grading fest to make sure we had everything cut off. But otherwise, grading was just a weekly activity, and whenever I got the grading to-do list cleared, I would update the outcome count for everybody, and I'd just post an announcement saying, hey, grades are up to date. Please go and look at your rubrics and make any resubmissions that you need to. And so it made the semester process a lot smoother and a lot more manageable, rather than saying, well, I've got the homeworks in for this week. I need to go and grade them so that I can get them all back to every student by Monday. Not having exams was nice in the sense that I didn't have to have this big push of, okay, we got to make a big review for the exam, then we have to get the exam, and then we have to spend the entire week grading the exam, and then we have to have the exam post-mortem. And I mean, you lose sometimes 2 weeks to an exam by the time you do all the adjacent exam-related activities. And so I really liked the fact that grading was it was part of the conversation with the student. I also felt like I got to know my students better, at least the ones who submitted the assignments, but hearing their voices, getting to see where they were recording these videos. Were they in the library? Were they in a coffee shop? Did they have music on in the background? Did they like to record their videos at a whiteboard or on paper? Did they hold their phone with their hand to record it? Did they find a tripod? Did they set it up on top of a coffee cup and then write it on the table? Each student's videos had their own personality of how they liked to present it, what they liked to start with. And you kind of got to know them. Like, you would say, oh, this is another one of Jennifer's submissions. And I know that she's going to give me and the graders a greeting. She's going to have some music playing in the background because she's at a coffee shop. And she's going to make some joke at the end. So I need to make sure I stick around for the joke at the end. Like, it was nice. At least on my end, I felt like I got to know them better. I hope they got to know me well enough in class for that to be comparable. But I really felt like I got to know the students a lot better than I do just, grading the same handwritten homework assignment every time, right? Because when the students write out their work, it tends to become very uniform, right? You don't really get to know them that well. And the resubmission process, I was a big fan of. It was often quick and effective. Depending on when I was grading and when the students were checking for updates to the Canvas page, we could sometimes get those things graded and resubmitted and regraded all within a couple hours. And so for the students, it could be a very quick, direct, effective process where, oh, I made a couple mistakes. Here I know how to fix it. I'm going to get it resubmitted. Oh, look, it's been regraded. Now I can move on with my life, all within a couple hours. Again, that is how it happened for some of the students. So with that statement, let me switch into what I did not like. What the things that are keeping me from doing this again, because I'm probably not going to do this format again. I like grading based on outcomes rather than based on, the actual problem itself. But there's a few things that went awry here. The first, absolutely the most frustrating thing, is that I had to explain this grading scheme every day in class. Like, I went over it in great detail the first day. And the first semester, I had a little trouble explaining it because I knew how it worked in my head. Like, I had an idea of this flow chart and everything. And I didn't do a great job explaining it to the students. But I did learn by about the midterm what kind of words to use and what kind of examples to give and how to show them how to navigate the process in Canvas. And by about the midterm, I felt like I was explaining it well. But I was still having to explain it to students who were still stuck on, why doesn't my assignment have a grade? Why don't I have a percentage or a letter grade on the video assessments? Why do you keep talking about outcomes? Where do I submit the outcomes? Like, they didn't understand that the grade was based on outcomes, but they're submitting video assessments. And then going into the spring semester, I was explaining it better at the beginning. Like, I felt like I was clearer. I wasn't talking in circles or anything. I felt like I was explaining it more directly, but I still, to this day, it's April 12th. We've been here for 12 weeks now. I'm still having to go over it every day in class and every time I have an office hour with a student. Now, that's not necessarily my fault or their fault, right? Because, they've had 13 years of you get a homework assignment, it has a deadline, it gets graded, and you don't get to go back to change anything about it. And so this process completely upends that. And so on the one hand, I'm devastating 13 years of social contract with their teachers. And so it is taking a while, but if they're still wondering what is going on with how the course is assessed by week 12, then something's not working, right? Like that tells me that this might be more trouble than it's worth, at least for me and for these students and for right now. The other thing that's come up in both semesters almost immediately is that students will deprioritize a non-performance-based class. It's sort of an arms race between students and instructors, where you have to make your course the most severe and have the greatest penalties for non-compliance with attendance and submitting things in a timely manner and formatting and being prepared for class, etc. And so as soon as one of their instructors relaxes those requirements, the students are going to focus all their energy on their more stringent classes. And so while students appreciated the open-ended format of my class and the rolling deadlines and the resubmissions and the choose your own assignments, structure of it, they really did not prioritize it. They prioritized their quote-unquote harder classes until they discovered that my class is actually hard, right? The subject matter is still difficult, even if the format is more flexible and more accommodating. But by that point, by the time they realized that, they were in over their heads. They didn't know what was going on, and they felt so overwhelmed and behind. And that's the other thing that I find that I don't like about this is I have no real way to motivate the students other than the looming final deadline, because there is a deadline, right? I have to submit final grades institutionally, and I don't get to change that deadline, right? So I have to set a final non-negotiable deadline of May 6th at noon. We physically cannot accept anything else. We must begin the grading process on all the stuff you've turned in that we haven't graded yet. And that's it. That's the only thing I can hold out in front of them is saying, look, you've only got so many weeks left. That means you're going to have to do so many video assessments per week to catch up. And they keep telling me, yeah, I'm going to catch up next week. It's always next week. It's been next week since the first week, and that was 11 weeks ago at this point. And again, I don't really blame them, because they've got other courses that are much more stringent. And yes, we're still in a pandemic. I don't care what other people think. We are still in a pandemic, and it is affecting these students' lives greatly. But it's like there has to be a cutoff at some point, because I have to enter the grades. And so until we have an institutional revolution, until we have that glorious new day of we're not assigning letter grades anymore, or we don't have a cutoff for a semester, or the students move on to the next class whenever they're ready because they've completed this material and they can move on to the next, or maybe we demolish the entire separate class structure and we just have these pathways that students take. I don't know what that future looks like, but until it's here, I really feel like those of us who adopt a more accommodating approach and a more mastery-based approach, our courses are always going to be deprioritized. Now it's not a big deal to me personally, right? I still am discharging my responsibilities. I still, to put it crassly, I still get paid the same no matter whether students, no matter what type of effort students put into my courses. But that is going to come up at yearly evaluation time. That is going to come up when, I have conversations with my colleagues about my class versus their class, and why aren't students showing up to your class, and why aren't students submitting things on time in your class. I mean, that it has ramifications, even if it's not strictly written into the institutional policies. And so I'm not sure. I like this approach. I really do like the structure. I think it has a lot of potential, and I'm glad that other people use it and it works. I'm glad that other people have had success with it. But I think for me, I don't think it's right for me, for right now, or for these students, right? And so I would love to do it again in the future. I would love, Lord willing, at some point when case numbers are at 0 and students are not having to self-isolate or go to the hospital at a moment's notice, I would love to try this again someday, or maybe a modified version of it. But I think my conclusion is not right now and not these students. So what am I going to do next? Because I mean, I don't want to go back to, traditional quibbling over points on exams and things. So I think I'm going to go back to a more traditional assignment structure. I think I'm going to go back to homeworks and exams. They're not my favorite thing in the world to do, but right now it's too much new stuff for students, and even though we know that homework and exams are problematic for them, they also need something familiar. They need a structure that they can actually recognize. But I think I'm going to bring in the standards-based rubric idea of that's how the grade for that assignment is determined. So I'm going to go back to grading assignments, I think, because I think having the outcome count, I think that was too vague for them. But like when I grade an exam, I can have that rubric and I say, okay, did you appropriately use the Pythagorean theorem? Yes or no? Did you appropriately write the expression for the magnitude of an electric field of a point charge? Yes, no. Did you appropriately plug in the values you needed for that electric field? Yes, no. And then make the grade based on that, rather than saying, well, this part of the problem is worth 5 points and this part of the problem is worth 6 points. And, oh, you solved the problem out of order, so I don't know how to assign the points anymore. I think that's going to help standardize that grading process while still giving students a little bit more of familiarity in their classes. So that's what's on my mind. Thank you for listening to these ramblings. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments about what's the best way for determining where grades come from, for coming up with other ways to motivate students beyond holding out grades or penalties in front of them. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.